Cities Skylines 2 just doesn't stop, with a patch just rolling out a couple of hours ago at the time of recording this video on Steam. The game has been updated yet again to fix what is, of course, a huge backlog of issues. So, in this video, and on the back of them just releasing their Word of the Week update, outlining some future plans and what they're working on, I can give you an update on that at the end and why I've published 2 videos today. Let's take a look at today's patch update for Cities 2. They say that today's patch is filled with improvements and bug fixes. It's live on Steam, and they're trying to get it onto Microsoft Store as soon as possible, hopefully a little bit faster than last time. Also, a quick note just before we get into the detail, existing save games thankfully will work with this new hotfix update, but you might have to run the simulation for a little while. Now, let's get into the good stuff. I like to try and break down these patch notes for you, put them into sort of little bundles that kind of make sense when they're not sorted. So, let's jump in and take a look. The first category is largely based around customers, specifically companies and the issue of no customers being around. They've increased leisure probability, the probability of a dude walking around in a park, to balance the no customers situation with commercial companies. You've probably seen a lot of yours crying out because there are no customers nearby. On the topic of companies, they've also improved the balance of companies' profit and turned down companies ordering input resources when their storage don't have enough space. Simply put, they won't buy things when they don't have anywhere to put it. And hopefully that no customers, that very annoying no customers issue, slightly addressed. We'll have to, of course, test it and see. The second grouping here focuses around companies, businesses, and particularly failed ones, as well as a bit of an oddball point in the middle, but it's an important one. Let's talk about those failing businesses. Firstly, they've fixed the trade resource bug that prevented some resources from being consumed at all. This one's pretty big. Leans into that thing that I mentioned at the start of the video. If you've seen some of my other stuff on cities, then you'll be well familiar with the idea that the simulation is just a bit fake. The economy is fake. It's a city painter, not a city builder. You will have seen that, I'm sure, many times in the YouTube comments, and I'm sure elsewhere. And so this one, of course we'll have to test it to see if it is actually working, could be very important in restoring a proper simulation to Cities Skylines. In and around it, the third and fourth points in this category also focus around businesses, how they move, how they go bankrupt. They've improved the conditions for companies to move away when bankrupt, and they've fixed a dependency error with land value, causing instability. Both of these things, although that second one could potentially be more about performance, it's a little vague in its wording, or maybe my interpretation's just garbage, but that other one about businesses, companies moving more readily also could help the simulation restore some accuracy. The middle point, speaking of accuracy, while it didn't quite fit anywhere else except in the last grouping, it's an important one, so I thought it was important to front face it a little bit more. The college and university eligibility count has been fixed. If your cities were anything like mine, you had about 7, 8, 9,000 people looking to go to college, and almost no one looking to go to university or the high school before both of these institutions. Apparently it was just an eligibility count issue, not an actual gameplay mechanical one. Maybe there's some relief there, but nonetheless, they've fixed that too, rounding out this little bundle of fixes and improvements. In our third grouping for the video, we have some issues around the map and lighting, and of course these will feed into performance rather than simulation accuracy necessarily, like the first 2 categories. Firstly, they've fixed an issue where loading a new map would cause water state to get out of sync with the save data. Haven't ran into that one myself, but if your water's going all over the place, then you'd probably be pretty frustrated. They've also slightly increased Windows emission intensity and optimizations for area lights. And not a huge amount of detail hidden, particularly in those last 2 bullet points, but what I'm reading between the lines here is some small improvements in and around lighting and performance, and how those 2 things correlate on the map. Hopefully some good stuff. I doubt that this section will necessarily be groundbreaking, though I'd be happy to be proven wrong. LODs and performance improvements are the focus for the 4th category inside of this video. Of course, those LODs, the level of detail, I guess, calculations, are something that have featured quite a bit. That's because Cities Skylines is rendering an awful lot of stuff and a lot of detail. So, what have they done to it? Well, they've improved shadow level of detail calculations, getting rid of unnecessary shadow casters earlier on in the simulation. They've also now enacted a preference towards rendering small objects after larger ones, when possible, to improve GPU performances in some cases. Now, of course, that just makes sense, right? You want the big high-rise buildings in the distance to be rendered before the teeth inside of a dude's head, or the little trees and shrubs, cars around it, whatever it may be. That one seems incredibly logical to me. And then finally, here on LODs and Performance, they've reduced situations where trees and alpha clipped objects would lead to virtual texturing space completely running out. That virtual texturing space that sort of powers up a little bit as you start up Cities Skylines 2 should help your machine render a little bit of what's going on, maybe shift some of it away from the focus. Well, they've reduced situations where trees and alpha clipped objects would lead to that running out. All of these things should contribute to an improvement in performance. Now, in a surprise fifth and final category, a whole load of miscellaneous stuff that could still have an impact. They've fixed citizens from hanging around at park areas on a regular building lot, never getting inside. They've decreased resolution of unnecessary large character textures, removed spasm radio ad due to offensive content. Hadn't quite picked up on that one myself. And finally, they've added missing localization ID for paradox account linking, which could very well be important as we move through. Look at things like the beta editor for Cities Skylines, of course, mods coming exclusively to Paradox's mod storefront. And as just one quick little side note, by the way, of course, there are plenty of things that we haven't talked about in this video that weren't included in the patch, so obviously we should expect, I would say, plenty more where this come from. As but one small example, you may have noticed the traffic in the background of that last point painfully selecting a lane, turning in front of it. What the? Stop doing that! My testing, my feedback here toward the end of the video before a quick but important note in a final section was, yeah, some improvement. Honestly, I think I may have seen between 3 and 7 frames per second consistently and on high graphics settings. Now, you've probably heard me talk about it before. I'm running a RTX 4090 high-end system here, and it doesn't really live up to expectation. Has this patch made it better, to kind of drill back into that question? I think the answer is yes, but I would also caution that just a little bit. It's definitely within the margin of error, and my testing isn't overly scientific, so it's also probably a little bit of a feel thing, as much as that might be a frustration. So let me know your feelings. Of course, if you're playing on Steam and watching this video just as it came out, you'll be extra relevant to this discussion, but likewise, as conversation comes through and rolls in a little later, happy to field that as well. My feeling, for what it's worth, is that while the patch has probably made some improvements, and it's good to see these things being addressed fairly quickly, of course, it's only been a week since launch, though arguably shouldn't have been there anyway. I think it's good to see. I don't think it's going to be groundbreaking though, considering its size, scale, and pacing. And that brings us to the end of this patch update. They didn't give any inclination about when we'll receive the next one, but if their past is anything to go by, they're working on a lot of stuff, as we discussed in a video that I released, honestly, about 8 hours ago. I'm sorry that they weren't merged together. You may have seen footage like this, the new editor, for example, in Cities Skylines 2 that we talked about, with all of its new features and its slightly work-in-progress UI around it. I'm sorry they weren't quite merged together. I published that last video, then I went to bed, got a notification at about 4:30 in the morning, about 4 hours later, saying a new patch has come out, and I thought, oh, jeez. Aw, really? Just missed it. But anyway, hopefully you enjoyed a double whammy for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.